Okay, so recording is in progress. Thank you, Pam. So do we have any questions, any announcements? If not, our guest today is Elizabeth Ellis. She will teach us about making posters. So Elizabeth, whenever you are ready.
All right, give me just a second to pull everything up. If I'm a little out of sorts for the second, it's because my mama cat decided to dump her entire litter box across the floor of her cage and then dumped her water in it. So I'm a little out of breath because I had to clean that up really quick. Because of course she did. All right. So today, and let me see about. Hold on. Oh, there we go. So I've got the chat popped up, so if you need to ask a question or something in chat, you can always just do that. That's fine. So today we're going to be talking about kind of this like new way to poster. Perhaps it's not really that new, but it is just kind of some novel ideas and topics regarding ways to make scientific posters appear a little bit cleaner, a little bit more presentable, and perhaps easier to read. So one thing I want to stress is that I do want this to kind of be a discussion. I don't necessarily want this to be just me talking the whole time. So if you do have questions, I will pause at times, or you can interrupt me at any point in time, and that's okay. So our agenda, I've got some starting points to go over. We're going to go over some poster basics, some like kind of do's and don'ts, how to avoid full sentences, and just a couple other points. Then we're going to talk about using graphic design in making posters. We're going to talk about 3 aspects of graphic design: balance, symmetry, and flow, and then a little bit of a wrap up. So to start with my points. So these are guidelines, not rules. So, don't take everything as a, this is the only way that this can be done, right? It's a kind of general concept. So just keep in mind every poster is different. Every conference, talk, symposium is different, and every field is different. So if there's things that I talk about and you're like, well, in my field, we don't do that, I'd say, okay. Some other things to keep in mind. You are the presentation, and the poster is a visual aid. So I think a lot of times there's this concept that the poster should be able to stand alone. And if you really think about the way conferences are set up, that's not necessarily true. So the idea behind a conference is that you have a poster and you are standing at the poster to talk about your studies. So the poster acts as a visual aid for not only you, but also your audience. Kind of one way to think about it is that the poster gives you sort of a guideline for where you should be going with your talk. So a poster is not a PowerPoint or a paper, so it is a kind of beast all its own. And this other point, so think of a poster like an abstract, gives the gist of the study. So a poster has very limited real estate. And in order to get your point across, you're probably not going to present, especially in a poster, every single piece of information in a study. It's just not necessarily feasible. And perhaps not everyone is going to care necessarily. And I know that's sad to hear, but that's the reality of the whole thing. And so you really should be trying to get across, if no one else, if they learn nothing else from your study, here's what they get to know. And obviously you should have a whole paper or something that they can follow up with if they're interested. So that's my opening spiel about, these aren't hard and fast rules. These are just general guidelines. So let's talk about some poster basics. So we're going to talk about some do's and don'ts. I always say to create it in PowerPoint, and I know I just said it's not PowerPoint, but PowerPoint has a lot of very good graphic design tools that are usable by the general public. Most people have PowerPoint, and a lot of the tools are, kind of semi-intuitive. And so if you already are familiar with PowerPoint, it's very easy to switch over to using PowerPoint as a way of creating posters. And then I say make slide correct size of poster, and I'll go over this a little bit more specifically. But what that is that the slide that you see, and when you're creating a PowerPoint, you can actually edit the size of the slide. And so if your poster needs to be 36 by 48 inches, you can make the slide 36 by 48 inches. And then when you go to print it, you don't have as much trouble when it comes to, things being stretched or problems with information getting moved to other places, or just, general formatting problems. If you're going to make charts and figures, try to make them in PowerPoint. The reason why, they are editable, so you can actually clean them up some if you need to. And it helps fit the poster theme. Some other things is to use a simple color palette, so really maximum 3 to 4 colors. It probably will look nice and visually appealing if you use like Wright State's color guide, and then that kind of gives a little bit of uniformity to it. Use consistent fonts, so typically that's going to be your Times New Roman. Now, if you wanted like your headers to be one font and it'd be a little bit different, and then the text to be, all the text to be a different font, that's, within the realm of using consistent fonts. And then make sure you add your citations. That is important. And so kind of the don'ts, and this is just a general, things to think about, is try to avoid the use of full sentences, and we'll go over why. But it also just to recall that a poster is not, it's not a paper. So you should not be pasting your whole paper into a poster for people to try to read all of that in a like 5-minute span. I put in here, don't use smart art. And if you're familiar with PowerPoint, smart art is this thing that like makes little pretty graphics and things for you. The only problem is they are horrible to edit. So usually it's better to just build each element on its own and then put it together, because the smart art elements are just horrendous to try to edit. So obviously this is kind of a reflection of the one across from it. So don't paste charts and figures as photos, because they're not editable. If you stretch them, it can stretch them out, make them look kind of blurry. If you realize there's a mistake in them, then you're not going to be able to go back and fix it, or it'll be a much bigger problem to try to do so. Don't use a complex color palette. So the more colors you get in there, the more confusing everything gets, and it gets very messy, and it just ends up not looking very nice. Try to avoid multiple fonts. So like I said, if you have like maybe 2 fonts in there, like your headers are one font, your text is another, that's okay. But you shouldn't be switching between fonts, every like 10 seconds. And I put in here, don't add a reference section. And I know that that's kind of a, what do you mean? And what I mean by this is that a reference section is going to be very long, and it's going to take up a lot of your real estate. So if you really feel the need to have a reference section, you can always print one out on a piece of paper, or have one available, because you should have a paper available. And you can say, yeah, you can see it at the end of the paper, or here is the printed out copy. And so by not having it on your poster, you save a lot of real estate. And to be perfectly honest with you, if people want to know what a citation, what the reference for a citation is, they're just going to ask. They're probably not going to go like read through your references. At least most people won't. All right, so before I move on to the next part, is there any questions or comments from the audience?
Yeah, Elizabeth, this is Valerie. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I got a mouthful of crackers. I wasn't expecting this possible. Regarding this reference section issue, you're not suggesting that we don't put citations in the poster itself, right? So I can say Pennebaker 2020, for example, and just not have the reference section?
Yes, exactly. So that's exactly what I'm suggesting, is that
Okay.
you should have citations, and that's why I have here under the do add citations.
Okay.
But you just should not have that really long APA style reference in there that is just taking up a lot of space that people aren't gonna necessarily read. And on a poster, all space is pretty much premium. So you don't want to use it up with stuff that people aren't going to care about as much.
Okay, so usually when I do this, I put a reference section in much smaller font. But my big concern here is I don't want people to stop being scholarly. that would undermine our reason for being.
No, and of course, which is, like I say, you should absolutely have citations on anything that needs a citation. But just avoiding the use of those really long references. And if you want to have those really long references for people to just kind of print them out and set them down as like a handout to give people who actually want to read them.
This is Rick Warren. And I just want to make a couple of comments, having been at a zillion psychonomics and seeing a variety of posters. One of the things is to make your poster such that people don't read it. Rather, they should engage with the person who's giving the poster. So I'm looking at your slide 21, which is good. In other words, skimpiness is good. And when you get posters that have massive blocks of text, that just gets people literally looking close and reading them rather than discussing with the poster presenter. And then the other thing, I don't know if you mentioned it here, that I always like is when people have 8.5 by 11 copies of their poster for to hand out. Over.
Yeah, and so that's something that I have I've done before, is had 8.5 by 11 copies. It depends on the conference. So when I do student conferences, I don't usually bring those, but then when I do professional conferences, I do. It also just depends on if I remember to print things out or not.
If I make one more comment. Again, I'm looking at your poster, slide 21. I don't see an email for you here. And I think that's another thing that's important because when people, again, have a takeout that is the 8.5 by 11 version, they may want to contact you. So having contact information, as in an email, I think is also very important.
Yeah, and certainly you could add that to the poster itself, or one of the things that my lab used to do was we made business cards for everybody. And so you could hand out basically a business card that had a contact information, or if we had a reference section or the 8.5 by 11, we would put that information, our email or whatever, on the printout so that they can take it with them. Instead of it being, just on the poster and hopefully they write it down or remember it, we would put it on the handouts.
Yeah, again, I just want to underline the importance of handouts, because that's when I'm seeing literally hundreds of posters, the ones I like, I get a handout and then I can always go back and look at them leisurely, contact the people if I need to.
Yeah, and certainly, and I would agree, a handout can be very useful. So certainly, and I did fail to put that in this PowerPoint, mostly because I was talking about the construction of the poster itself. But yes, you bring up a very good point that handouts can be very helpful.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, so somebody else have a question?
Yeah, Liz, it's Alec. Just briefly. I feel like something that you kind of mentioned, but doesn't have a bullet point, so I wanted to ask you about, is like the ratio between like figures and text. Like I know you mentioned we don't want big paragraphs and full sentences on our posters, but do you think our poster should be like you know, 2/3 figures and 1/3 text, or is that too bad of a ratio, or what do you think?
So you're gonna love the section when we get to talking about graphic design. I've got a couple slides about that in just a couple minutes. Where we're going to talk about how you should balance text to figures and how you should kind of present them within the poster itself. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next section, or to the next part. And that's just, this part's just about avoiding full sentences. So I'm not going to read all of this. This is just clips from my thesis, because I have a lot of words in my thesis. But so what we see is that even though this takes up the same physical amount, right, of space, this side over here, where it's the bullet points, is much easier to read. And I do want to point out that I still have my very nice citation up here. And if somebody were to say, well, what is the Wilmot 2015 article? You know, I could say, you know, this is the article, this was his dissertation research, and, you know, here, let me hand you my handout with the citation on it, right? And so what you can do to avoid full sentences is to take your paragraph and kind of highlight key points that you want to make, and then you kind of arrange those key points into bullet points. And you can use bold and italics to like kind of further make a point. So like here, I've got bivariate self-monitoring, and then I make a point that I'm talking about acquisitive, so I bold it, and then here protective, so I bold it so that it makes it a little more obvious reading going down which one I'm talking about. And I will, as an aside, tell you that this process here is basically reverse outlining. And it's actually really helpful to do even if you're not making a poster, because it helps you figure out, did I say the things I meant to say to make it make sense? And, you know, and when you're giving your poster talk, you're going to elaborate on these. You know, I'm not going to just stand there as a poster presenter and say, bivariate self-monitoring, acquisitive self-monitoring, gain social status, protective self-monitoring, avoid social status loss. You know, I'm going to be very deliberate in what I say, and I'm going to say, you know, there is this, you know, dichotomous concept of bivariate self-monitoring, or not dichotomous, but this two-level concept of bivariate self-monitoring. We have acquisitive self-monitoring, and they seek to gain status, blah, 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 blah. You know, I'm going to verbally give more information because, as I said before, you, the speaker, are the presentation, and the poster is a visual aid or kind of an outline of what you intend to talk about. So, and this is certainly a thing that does require practice. It's not something that is always easily done right from the beginning. And sometimes it's also good to just talk about it with someone else, and they'll kind of, you know, be like, hey, what were the key takeaways from whatever it was I just said? Like, give me some words, you know? So you can make this into a collaborative effort for sure. All right, so we're gonna move on to the next part. So this is just some other points, kind of elaborating on some of my do's and don'ts. So for using consistent, use consistent font sizes. So we're going to do a breakdown in just a minute of the way the poster can kind of be laid out. And you'll see you'll have a title, subtitles, major headings, subheadings, text, and citations. And so these font sizes that I've listed here are ones that if the person is standing like 3 to 4 feet from your poster, they'll still be able to see it as long as they have, you know, like corrected, you know, either near perfect or corrected to near perfect vision. So, you know, make things nice and big so people can read them. If you have a lot of text, and, you know, obviously we want to avoid a lot of text, but just in case if you've got a lot of information, you can bump it down to 28, but we really prefer to stay up in that 32 point zone. And citations should be 24. That means that they're kind of just readable, but they don't take up an overwhelming amount of space. And this portion over here is perhaps a little bit more technical. But so to change the size of the slide to fit the ratio for the poster, in PowerPoint, you go to Design, Slide Size, Custom Slide Size. The align and group features are your very best friends. So you can kind of align like a whole column, and then you can move things within that column, but they all stay together. Try to limit your number of text boxes, so not every single bullet point perhaps needs to be its own text box. That just makes formatting easier. And then we talk about printing out a handout, but also print out a small version to check everything. So if you get your poster done and you're like, okay, does this look good? You can print out an 8.5 by 11, probably do it in black and white font or like grayscale so you don't waste all your ink. But print it out, you know, hold it like a foot from you or so and say, okay, you know, does this look even, balanced? You know, does it flow well? All that good stuff. And something that I should say is that usually when I do this talk, I get a lot more technical because I'm teaching undergraduates like how to use PowerPoint to do this. So I tried to pull a lot of the technical stuff out, but some of the technical stuff is still semi-important. So I don't want to get too bogged down in that kind of stuff. But our next section we're going to be moving on to is talking about graphic design itself and the use of that in poster making. So before we move on to that, is there any other questions or anything about kind of this just general poster basics? Okay. Like with my students, I'm going to assume the silence means that you don't have any questions, and I'm going to keep going. Oh, right. Sorry, I forgot I had this in here. General outline. I thought this was in the next section, but nope, it's here. Okay, so this is just a general kind of like from far away what the poster could look like. So you've usually got like your poster title, author names. Maybe this is a little bit smaller. Usually an affiliation down here and like maybe the logo up here if you want. What we used to do in my old lab was we had like the UNF logo up here, but then our lab affiliation. So we were the person by situation lab team. So we had person by situation down at the bottom. But then it follows the general idea. So you have an introduction, key concepts, hypotheses, all that good stuff, maybe some models in there. Method, you'll have your participants, materials, procedure, results, graphs, figures, you know, what have you. And then your typical discussion section, conclusion, limitation, future directions. And so this kind of outline gives a very nice, you know, and I'll show how the flow works when we get to the flow section. But this is just kind of to give you a zoomed out kind of overview template. Another alternative is this kind of funny one where you split it, you take the two middle columns and you stack them on top of each other instead. I find that this one works a lot better if, say, you have a poster that's two studies. And so then you can do like study one methods, study one results, study two methods, study two results, and then have your like overview, discussion, conclusion, and all that stuff. And obviously that works on better if those two studies are very, very similar. But I also just, you know, sometimes if people have really big tables or something that they want to put in there, which I don't recommend, but sometimes that's what you got to do, and that's okay. You know, this way it works better because you have more room for the results for tables and things like that. Okay, now we're where I thought I was. I hate that when I forget there's a slide somewhere. All right, so using graphic design and poster making. So I have many hobbies. I don't know why, but I do. One of them is graphic design. I also have several friends who are in graphic design, and so they kind of helped me articulate some of the stuff that I wanted to say about posters. And so the key concepts that we're going to be talking about is balance, symmetry, and flow. And so these are three similar interrelated concepts that when you have the three of them together, creates a poster that is visually appealing. So let's see. Let's talk about balance. How do we create balance? We create balance through the use of white space, and the next slide is going to talk about what white space is. We use tables to display comparison information. So, you know, if you have like, I'm trying to think, if you have like introvert versus extrovert and you have a couple different definitions for it, you might use a table. We use charts and figures to display results and use graphical models to display hypotheses and or results. And so this answers Alex's question. You want about a 50-50 split for graphics versus text. And that's not to say that those graphics won't have text within them, but they will be kind of broken up by like colors or things like that. And you want about a 50-50, but sometimes you might have, you know, if you had a lot of information about a mediation model, you might have more graphics because you might display that mediation model more prominently. But if you had something that was more theoretical, more conceptual, you might have a little more text. So you got this like kind of 20% wiggle room, but you never want to really break that 40-60, you know, 40-60 split. So let's talk about white space. White space is negative space. And so on your poster, yes, white space will typically be white, but it's any section of your poster not taken up by graphics or text. It creates natural visual breaks and should be even between sections. So you see here we have kind of that poster outline that I was showing you before, but now I've blocked off like where the text would be. And you see that by having gaps between the different areas, we create kind of this white space that purposely breaks it up. And I will show you an actual poster that I've put together at the end, and we'll kind of wrap it up and discuss these different ways that this is used in that poster. But to kind of give a more zoomed in view, now obviously when you make your actual poster, perhaps not obviously, I shouldn't use that word, but when you make your actual poster, those gray boxes wouldn't be there. But what I'm trying to highlight is that when you have this information in these sections, you create this natural kind of break. And you would probably want like text boxes that look like these sections. But obviously, you know, don't put the gray background in there unless you really want to break it up that way. All right, so tables for comparison. That's what I was talking about before. So I've got this big old chunk of text and there's so much stuff in it. And oh my goodness. oh goodness. So you can make it into a table. And you can just say we've got low self-monitoring, high self-monitoring. We have ability, motivation, intention, use of ability, and behavior. And we can just nicely put all that information in there. We don't lose the context, but we get it in a nice, easy to read format. And we still got our handy dandy citation down at the bottom. And so this is very similar to what I was talking about not using full sentences, but this is just another way of kind of displaying not using full sentences by taking information and putting it into a table. And the thing is that this table technically counts as a graphical representation of information. It just has text within it. But you are breaking up the flow, not in a bad way, but you're breaking up the flow a bit by having kind of this off to the side color or what have you. Charts and figures for results. So instead of having some super long, like the task type was errors, and for the verbal condition, there was 18 students and it was a 0.72 mean, and there was a standard deviation of 0.89, and this, you know, blah, 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 blah. Nice handy dandy table. It's very easy to read, right? So people can just see, okay, errors, verbal, written, and they can just look at it. Also just using figures. So having a figure built in, you can add more information to the figure if need be. So if you wanted like little tick marks or our standard error bars or anything like that, you know, whatever suits you when it comes to making tables. Something I do want to point out is that APA actually specifically makes a point that presentations, be they posters or PowerPoints, do not necessarily need to follow APA guidelines, because APA guidelines are for written information, and presentations are not necessarily the same thing. So they do make a purposeful statement saying that you can be a little bit looser on the rules when it comes to APA style and posters. So if you want to put together a table that, you know, looks pretty, as long as it's readable, please don't use a 3D table. Those are terrible. Unless, I guess, if you have to, because you have so many variables. All right. Use a graphical model. So instead of saying, you know, self-monitoring is related to burnout through rule conflict, make a model. And so, yes, this model takes up more space than that sentence, but this graphical representation is sometimes a little bit easier for people to understand, because if they know about mediation or moderation. I've also found that, like, in students, so I've done many conferences, both student and professional conferences, and what I found is that if the person doesn't really understand mediation, these kinds of charts actually help them a lot, because you just be like, see a connection, but actually it goes through this other thing. Or if you have mediation in there. And then again, for graphical models, you know, we have high self-monitors experience less emotional exhaustion, high self-monitors experience more cynicism, then blah, 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 blah. So instead of having a wall of text, you have just a nice little graphic that says, hey, this is more than that, and that's less than that. And so that can be used certainly for continuous variables or even ANOVAs and things like that. Okay, so I did go through that section. I'll go back one. Is there any questions about the whole balance piece? Okay, again, I'm going to assume silence means I can keep going. All right, so symmetry. Symmetry is related to balance in that it's about having kind of an even distribution. So we have three types of symmetry. We have bilateral, so that's similar amounts of elements on either side of the axis. So if we look at our example poster over on the side, text is in this kind of yellow color, table is in orange. And so we see, if we look down the middle one, we've got kind of an even split of tables and charts versus figure versus text. If we go the other direction, we still have kind of an even split. And I'm gonna highlight this point down at the bottom. It's not an exact science. Sometimes you can't always finagle it to be exact, and that's okay as long as you're kind of close. Another one is radial symmetry. So that's similar amounts of elements in each quadrant. So then if we look at our quadrants, so both axes at the same time, you can see we got pretty similar table to text, chart to text, figure to text, table to text. And I will point out, I'm mostly talking about these central sections, because obviously the top part where you have your title and affiliation, that's mostly just going to be text and not a whole lot of, you know, images that convey information. Then we have what is called translational symmetry. So this is the repeating of patterns. So what this means is that, all right, so if I start out my poster talking about low versus high self-monitors, and I'm going to use that example because I think every poster I've ever made, save two, it's been about self-monitoring. So I've got lots of examples about that. So if I start out and the first thing I say is low versus high self-monitors, when I go to the results section, I need to talk about low than high self-monitors. When I go to the discussion, I should talk about low than high self-monitors. I shouldn't switch it over and talk about something different. If I present my hypothesis as a figure, as a graphical model, and I go to talk about my results, I should repeat that graphical model as a way of explaining how the results relate to my hypothesis. You know, if I certain wording for something, that should translate over to the next section that I talk about that wording. So having that symmetry. And what that does is that helps the flow. So translational symmetry, you know, the repeating of patterns. Also, if I have, you know, if in my introduction I have one graphical figure and like 2 blocks of text, and obviously when I say a block of text, I don't mean like solid sentences. I just mean, you know, a piece of information. When I get to my discussion, in order for it to be translational, I'm going to want to have a similar amount of information like that. So I'm going to want to try to put in a figure or a graphical element. Same thing kind of with those middle sections. If I've got 1 and 1, you know, then I need to sort of repeat that again. And that kind of creates a balanced visual. The last piece is flow. So flow depends on what you're talking about necessarily, but it means that you know, your poster should follow the logical steps taken in the paper. So you have your main sections. We read, you know, left to right. So from left to right, introduction, method, results, discussion. And then as you go down, the subsections should go from top to bottom in a logical order. So you're not going to want to start with your hypotheses. You're going to want to start with kind of your, you know, your hello, so what, perhaps, and then include, you know, what are your main variables, and kind of present them in a way that is logical. So if one variable is more important than the other, start with that one, right? Method, you're not going to present the procedure before the participants. That's not the way that we expect a paper to go. So we're going to have our participants, materials, procedure. Results obviously can be a little bit different. You can have a little bit more, you know, play with how you present things. Discussion, though, that's typically our conclusion, limitations, future directions. And so flow is kind of this natural order of things. This is how we expect a paper to be set up. If you think of the poster as a subset of the paper, we want the poster to flow the same way the paper does. And this also just helps alleviate confusion. So we've got all these pieces together, and what does that wrap up to look like, right? It wraps up to look something like this. Now, there are some things I would probably do differently here. This isn't a, where did we present this? Where did I present this? I don't remember what conference I presented it in. It was somewhere in Florida. But this was a preliminary idea about my thesis, I believe, or were these my actual results? No, that's right. These are my actual results. Okay. I did this one so many times I forgot where I was at. And so there are obviously some things that violate the rules I just talked about, or guidelines, right? Because they're guidelines, not rules. But you can see we've got, you know, we don't have any really full sentences, except here in the research questions. Sometimes a hypothesis is just going to be a full sentence. You can't get around it always. And obviously I have full sentences when I'm presenting items of a scale, and that's because you don't want to misrepresent the items. So you want to put the item exactly how it's going to be. But my center of my poster here is very heavily graphical. So I do have these break apart pieces of the various, what are those things called? Scales. There we go. Questionnaires. I forgot what those were called for a second. Goodness. So it's very kind of heavily graphical, and then my results I put very graphically. I did in a printout have my tables that had the actual numbers, like the actual bivariate, not bivariate correlations, the actual beta values and things like that. But I left them off the poster, the numbers, because that's, I recall now. I presented this at a student conference. And so at a student conference, we try to avoid as much statistics as we can because it tends to confuse them a little bit. So I went much more graphical, look, arrows. But if I was presenting this at a professional conference, I might have actually put in the beta values into these graphics. And then we see that, you know, this is pretty text heavy, and this one's mostly text heavy with just a little bit, you know, this table kind of over there. But what we do see, and I want to point out, is that we have these breaks. So we see the way that white space, you know, even though the whole background is white, we see that there are breaks in the text that create this natural flow of, okay, these sections go together. And you probably hear screaming in the background. I'm sorry. There's kittens and they all four woke up at once. Goodness. Okay. So that was my whole spiel. I wanted to keep it kind of short so that I could then open it up for a lot of discussion at the end. So that's what I'm going to do. Who'd like to ask a question?
Not really a question, but I just want to say that I appreciated the graphic design portion. I really, I had never seen something like that, like all these concepts kind of laid out in a nice organized way like that. To know that each of these things kind of has like a specific, you know, name or like term, I found that pretty interesting. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, you're welcome.
I wanted to ask, and I don't know, Liz, if you could answer this, but at Wright State, do we have access to, you know, a large printer that could print something multiple feet wide and multiple feet tall, you know, so that, you know, we don't have to print these out into, you know, 100 different small papers or onto bed sheets or something?
So that's not a question that I can answer because I don't know, unfortunately.
I can.
Oh, okay, yay.
At least before the pandemic, the answer was yes. And it's over by in the student union. I think it's next to the bookstore. And I know many of us have had interactions with these people. One of the best things that they can do is print, if you give enough advance notice, you can get it printed out on cloth, which back in the olden days when we were traveling on airplanes was incredibly helpful for providing posters at events. But yes, this exists. We do have to pay for it. My recollection back in the olden days was it was about $100 to get your sort of standard cloth poster printed out. If you look in my on the fourth floor of my lab, I think I have some cloth posters there. And then your alternative, if that doesn't work for you, mostly because you didn't give anybody enough lead time, that's the usual reason, is Kinko's will do this also for you. And the good thing about Kinko's is that they will have it printed out at the conference location. So you don't have to carry it with you. Now you do have to get it transported home, but on the way home, you're probably not so worried if it gets wrinkled. So those are two options for you. One is the printing resources at Wright State that we used to have, and two is Kinko's.
And for anyone who doesn't know what Kinko's is, that's going to be like Staples or Office Depot or any other printing. Also, I was gonna, as an aside, so I will say that printing it on paper is going to give you a crisper image. And what you can do is you can get a poster It's actually a poster tube, and it has a screw on top, and it's very nice. It's hard. And you can roll the poster up very nicely, very gently, put it in that tube. It's airport safe. It counts as it counts as one of your carry-ons, so hopefully you don't have too much stuff. But you can take it on there, and it'll basically survive like nuclear warfare. And you can get your poster safely to where you want to go. If you can't do that, then yeah, a cloth one will fold up quite nicely, and then you can just quickly iron it or something, I guess, in your in your hotel room at the end before it starts.
I just want to add that the printing services at Wright State have moved from the student union to some building close to the Wright State Physicians, close to the mini university, if you know that area. And they have excellent services there.
Okay.
They can print printers like over a couple of days. If you give them a couple of days in advance, they give you a number of options. You can charge on the grant or on your lab funds. Something to look into. I hope they're still in business with us because it was excellent service.
Yeah, I will say having one on campus is very nice. I know that at UNF during my last 2 years there, our giant printer broke and the school was like, that's too bad. And they just refused to fix they refused to replace it. So we all had to scramble to find a new place to go. And so having one on campus is nice. Also because you can work a little bit more directly with them to be like, hey, this is what it's supposed to be. Something else that I would say is that just this is an aside and probably a little more technical. When you're saving your PowerPoint file, you can save it as a bitmap, and that's probably your better bet. But what I would do is bring your original PowerPoint document and your bitmap. So that way they can choose which one they want to print. A bitmap, just for the edification of everybody, is kind of a document type that allows like stretching and moving, but it's kind of like having a PDF where it's very stationary. You can't really edit it, but they can stretch it to different sizes and stuff, and it kind of keeps its ratio to an extent. And it's designed for text rather than images necessarily. All right, what else?
In case
if we
the
don't-
newer,
Go
in
ahead.
case the newer students don't know, you can find the official Wright State logos, and you're required to use the official versions, but you can find them online at the Wright State webpage. So please use the official approved Wright State logos.
Oh yeah, that's a very good point. Also, a lot of schools in Wright State is probably not odd in this, have a kind of a document that lists the official colors as well, and it gives you typically the hex code for them. Now that one might take a little bit more digging, but that should be available somewhere for you as well.
I think that's available at the same place that the logos are.
Okay, fantastic. Usually it is, but every once in a while schools like to be a little bit unique and put it somewhere else.
All right. If we don't have any other questions, I would like to say thank you to the speaker and thank you all for attending. I'll see you next week.
Thanks a little bit.
Thanks. You guys are welcome. Hope you enjoyed.